Hi everyone, I'm Dr. R.F. Nelson for the Soft Matter Kitchen. I'm a rheologist, and today I'll be introducing you to the concept of rheology and the kinds of materials that we rheologists study. Etymologically, rheology seems to mean something like the study of flow, which might sound a lot like I'm talking about fluid mechanics or the study of fluids. But the modern field of rheology is actually concerned more broadly with the study of deformation and flow of complex materials. But that maybe doesn't really tell you anything. After all, what is a complex material? And how is that different from other fluids that we might study? Well, to answer this, we should first review simpler materials, including both fluids and solids. Something that many people learn when they're young is that what defines a material as a solid is that it has its own shape. And in terms of a material property, it has an elasticity, or a stiffness, which resists deformation. Fluids, on the other hand, like the water I have here, would then be defined as materials that take the shape of their container, and fluids have a viscosity, which is their resistance to flow. So, to think about fluids a bit more, here I have honey and whipped cream, and we're going to try and answer the question, which of these is more viscous? To figure this out, we can do an experiment, but first, as a rheologist, I always think it's important to play around with my food a little bit. Anyway, for this experiment, I'm going to spread thin layers of the honey and the whipped cream. Then take a weight and see how quickly it can slide down each of them. Whichever material has the greater resistance to flow will slow the weight down more once I tilt the surface. Let's take a look. And the whipped cream finishes way ahead. So, does this answer our question? As I think most people would have expected, the weight does indeed take much longer to slide down on the honey, indicating that here it is more viscous. But did you notice anything weird about the whipped cream? It turns out what we just did is not the whole story. This experiment wasn't the only way to look at the viscosities of these materials. Another way we can do this is to dip a spoon into them and see how long it takes for the material to drip off under its own weight. In this case, a more viscous material should take longer to drip off. So, while you can see that the honey drips off fairly readily, with the whipped cream we'd be waiting a very, very long time for anything to happen. In fact, under its own weight, the whipped cream seems to be holding its own shape, which we said is how solids behave. What does that mean about its viscosity then? What's going on here? What's the answer to our question? Well, it turns out that the answer is a little bit complex. This honey is an example of a simple fluid. It has a constant viscosity, and no matter how I push or pull on it, it keeps behaving like a fluid. On the other hand, whipped cream is a great example of the complex materials that rheologists study. When we apply a high stress to it, either using our fingers or with a heavy weight, it behaves like a low viscosity fluid. But at low applied stresses, like its own weight or just poking it very slightly, it behaves like a solid in terms of holding its own shape. We can consider this as it having an extremely high resistance to flow. So then, the answer to whether or not whipped cream is more viscous than honey actually depends on how we are pushing on it, and this is what makes it a complex material. When rheologists study complex materials, we're investigating things that have properties that depend on or are a function of how we push on it, some physical input. And these materials are usually somewhere in between these simple concepts of fluid and solid. With whipped cream, I showed you that how hard we push on it matters for whether it behaves more like a fluid or solid. But there are many different categories and types of complex materials that rheologists study, especially in the kitchen. So the next time you're eating a food and you get curious about its behavior, there's a good chance that it may be a complex material. I hope when that happens that you'll think about it and play around with your food a bit more, like a rheologist might. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to rheology. This video was made with support from the Rheology Venture Fund of the Society of Rheology. Until next time, I'm Dr. R.F. Nelson for the Soft Matter Kitchen.